like to fly that plane someday. So it really was a dream come true. I'm 77 now. So I'll tell you quickly how I got to the airplane. I went to Auburn, majored in electrical engineering. And by the way, I was down there a few months ago and visited one of my electrical engineering professors, Dr. Irwin. He's still teaching at age 84 years old. Somebody I really admire. Then when I graduated from Auburn, Colonel Merritt pinned on my second lieutenant bars, and I was in the Air Force. So I went to pilot training out in Arizona through the T-38. Did really well in the T-38. Graduated near the top of my class. And one of the main reasons I did so well was I had a great instructor standing beside me right here, Brian Weatherly. We remained good friends ever since, and until he passed away just a few years ago, but I owe a lot of my success to my instructor, Brian Weatherly. So being near the top of the class, I was able to choose my assignment, and I chose the RF-4 reconnaissance version of the Phantom, because one of my hobbies in high school was photography, so I got to combine photography with flying. Chose the RF-4. That was before the F-15 and F-16 were available. I would love to have flown either one of those. Our mission was exciting, primarily low altitude, high speed photography. One of my most unusual RF-4 assignments was to go to St. Louis and pick up a brand new RF-4 and take it to Tehran, Iran, because they were, 1976, they were still our friends and buying airplanes from us. And it's so sad that the new regime in 1979 became our enemies. It's real sad. Anyway, after 5 years in the RF-4, and this, by the way, this is one of my flights in Okinawa. I'm kneeling on the far right, and I'm still keeping contact with a lot of these guys. We're especially proud of the tall lieutenant standing on the far left, Kevin Chilton. He eventually became a 4-star general, and he's been really good to keep up his friendship with us, even though he vastly outranks us. He retired in 2011. Then I became a fighter pilot in the F-4E fighter aircraft. I really enjoyed being a fighter pilot too. Never was in combat, but really enjoyed training for combat, and especially enjoyed the bombing competitions we had for accuracy. And even more than the weapons delivery, I enjoyed the air-to-air tactics, air-to-air combat. Really exciting. And I want to show you this picture real quick because my flight commander, Jim Anderson, is standing behind his dad right here just a few years ago. His dad passed away 2 years ago at age 102. He's one of our American heroes. He was flying T-51s with Chuck Yeager over in England. And Bud Anderson that you see here is was the last remaining triple ace. So he shot down 16 German aircraft. So it was really an honor to know him. Then after 3 more years in the Phantom, Congress, my application to the SR-71 was noticed, and they invited me to come interview out at Beale, and it was a week-long interview process, and amazingly I was chosen to be one of the SR-71 pilots, so really a dream come true. I got to fly the Blackbird for 6 years, and soon after I got to Beale, before I'd even had a flight, Chuck Yeager came out. One of the high-ranking generals commanded that we give him a flight in the SR-71, so Maury Rosenberg, one of the instructors, gave Chuck Yeager a flight in the SR-71. I got to talk to Chuck Yeager a little bit, and he was good to us that day and talked about how much he enjoyed flying the SR. You know, he was the first human to ever go faster than sound back in 1947, Chuck Yeager. He passed away just 5 years ago now at age 97. So I flew the airplane from late 1983 until it retired in 1990. It was a fascinating airplane, beautiful airplane, exciting. We felt like we were doing something really important for our country. I can tell you the limits of it now. I couldn't while I was actually flying it. but its ceiling was 85,000 feet, Mach 3.3, and Mach 3.3 means 3.3 times the speed of sound. Well, the speed of sound down here on a day like today is about 760 miles an hour. But up high where we're flying there is a lot colder and the molecules will bounce around slower, so the speed of sound is slower up there near 80,000 feet. Speed of sound is about 660 miles an hour, so if you multiply that times Mach 3.3, you get 2,178 miles per hour. Ordinarily, we weren't allowed to fly faster than Mach 3.2, and 3.3 was the absolute maximum for the airplane. And that works out to about 36 miles a minute. One of the guys told me, you can sure get lost in a hurry if you're not on the right course. So that's about a mile every 1.65 seconds. We had a readout miles to the next turn point, so those miles were clicking by about one every 1.7 seconds, another mile going by. So you didn't feel the sensation of speed so much up there as you noticing those miles clicking by in a hurry. And as he said, that's faster than a speeding bullet, faster than a rifle bullet. Now a supersonic airplane leaves a wake in the air. It's, a boat will leave a wake in the water, but a supersonic airplane will leave a three-dimensional wake. And everybody that's under that wake as it flies by, a shock wave, everybody that's under that shock wave as it goes by hears boom, and sometimes you'll hear a double boom from a shock wave off the nose and a shock wave off the wing. Now the SR-71 that I flew was a two-seat airplane. We had a navigator in the back seat, and you can see he had a window that he could look out the side. The early version Blackbirds, built 2 years early, were single-seat Blackbirds called the A-12, and those were flown by the CIA. And as soon as the SR-71 started operating, they retired all the single-seat Blackbirds. Now, Alabama's got more Blackbirds on display than any other state in the Union except California. And Alabama has 3 Blackbirds on display, one at the Rocket Center in Huntsville, one at the Air Museum in Birmingham, and one in the airplane hangar down near the USS Alabama. But when you see those Blackbirds, you'll notice that it does not have the window behind the cockpit. That's the main way to tell the difference in the single seat and the two-seat. So the one at the Rocket Center is being repainted right now. It's out of view, but they're going to remount it over there. And you'll notice it doesn't have a window in the back. Now the airplane was built by the Skunk Works section of Lockheed, famous secret. Well, the existence of the Skunk Works is not secret, but everything they work on is secret. That's the Skunk Works factory while they're building the Blackbirds. This is one of my main heroes, Kelly Johnson. He was the mastermind behind building the SR-71. It was his ideas. He was born Clarence L. Johnson, and he lived from 1910 to 1990. But as a kid, people were constantly making fun of him with his name Clarence, and one of the bigger boys would often call him Clara, would make him mad. So there was a famous song at the time called Has Anybody Here Seen Kelly? And you can listen to that song on YouTube, and it's a catchy tune. And anyway, he liked the sound of Kelly, and he started writing his name always Kelly. And from then on, he was always known as Kelly Johnson. And when he would sign something official, he would put C.L. Kelly Johnson. I read his biography, and that's where I learned about his changing his name. He was born in a low-income family in northern Michigan. In a low-income family, he was number 7 of 9 kids. He had to work his way through school and college, and so you really have to admire him for his determination. He says in his book that he was inspired by library books, especially the Tom Swift series, and he was determined to grow up and be a designer, and so he became one of America's premier airplane designers. This is where I was going to tell you. Has anybody here seen Kelly, that catchy little tune? Now, I met his stepson, John Horrigan, and John invited me to his home in California and showed me some of young Kelly's drawings that he blew up and hung up on his wall, and he showed me Kelly Johnson's scrapbook that he made when he was just 12, 13 years old. I enjoyed looking through that scrapbook, Kelly Johnson's scrapbook. So this would have been around 1923, and these would have been state-of-the-art airplane designs back in those days, but young Kelly was already designing airplanes. But I got a special kick out of this page in his scrapbook. He says, notice the exclamation points at the top. It tells about the French taking the airplane speed record from the Americans at 278 miles an hour, and you can just imagine young Kelly thinking, that is just unacceptable. I'm going to design a plane someday that'll take that record, and he sure did. This airplane still holds the world absolute speed record for an airplane, the SR-71. Besides being a brilliant engineer, he was also a brilliant manager, and that combination of engineering and management is what made Kelly so successful. Show you some of his early designs. He designed the P-38, which was very important during the World War II. That's Dick Bong there, America's leading ace with 40 Japanese kills, all with Kelly Johnson's P-38. The P-38 is credited with having shot down 1,900 Japanese airplanes, so I think Kelly's contribution to winning World War II should not be minimized. Here's Dick Bong with the second leading ace, Tom McGuire, with 38 kills, all with Kelly Johnson's P-38. Another pilot, not those two, shot down Yamamoto early in the war with Kelly's P-38. Yamamoto was in charge of all the Japanese military, and was the mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor attack, December 7, 1941. Toward the end of the war, Kelly designed America's first operational jet fighter, the F-80 Shooting Star, and it made the front page of Life magazine. It says 1945. You had to pay 10 cents though for those. This is the F-104 that he designed, America's first Mark II airplane, and he designed the U-2 spy plane that was shot down over Russia May 1st, 1960. I was 11 years old at that time, and I remember it being all in the news, the U-2 being shot down over there. They captured our pilot, Francis Gary Powers. We eventually got him back with a spy swap. They made a really good movie about that about 10 or 12 years ago, The Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks. That was really a good movie. I really enjoyed it. Anyway, Kelly decided he would build an airplane that was too high and too fast to be shot down. His crowning achievement, the SR-71, beautiful SR-71, and at the time mysterious SR-71. Main engineering challenge was heat on the airplane, going so fast, even though the air was minus 70 Fahrenheit, at those speeds, friction with the air caused the skin to be average 550 degrees Fahrenheit. So heat was the main challenge in building the airplane. He built it primarily out of titanium, which you see titanium is one of the lightest of the transition metals that can take that high temperature. His engineers built it primarily with slide rules. My engineering class of 1972 was one of the last engineering classes at Auburn to use only slide rules for our engineering courses. It was just a few years, just 2 or 3 years after that, that pocket calculators became cheap enough and were allowed to be used by engineering students. And those little pocket calculators were really nice. The airplane is famous for leaking fuel. It would expand in flight due to the heat. It would expand about 4 inches in length, and then when it would land, it would contract. And it had expansion joints built in the airplane, but it would land and then it would leak fuel. So when I would go out to fly the airplane, it was always a big puddle of fuel underneath the airplane. And it was a special fuel called JP7, had a real high flash point. So they told me it was not dangerous. They said you could hold a match to it and you couldn't light the fuel. I never did actually try that, but that's what they told me. And so there's another, so whenever we would start the engines, we'd give it a shot of TEB. And here's somebody demonstrating the TEB. The TEB is a chemical that starts to burn as soon as it comes in contact with oxygen, and it burns hot enough to light the fuel. So every time we lit the engines and the afterburners, give it a shot of TEB, and that would light the fuel. As an additional precaution, as we burned fuel out of the fuel tanks, we carried liquid nitrogen on board, and that space in the fuel tanks as we burned fuel would be occupied then by nitrogen, which was inert, so that the fuel would not start, so that hot fuel in the fuel tanks would not start to burn. The very first test pilot to fly the SR-71, Bob Gilliland, had his first test flight on December the 22nd, 1964. You know, when I was dreaming of flying the airplane, it never occurred to me I'd get to meet the first test pilot. Well, not only did I get to meet him, he became one of my best friends. He's 22 years older than me, and befriended me. And I think one reason was we're both from the Southeast. He's from Memphis, and he went to high school at Bell Buckle boarding school just north of Tullahoma. Anyway, I really enjoyed friendship with Bob. I wanted to tell you that I was asked to be the technical advisor for his biography. So I don't get any royalties, of course, but I thought anyway, I was real proud of the book because I'm real happy with the accuracy of it. I spent a lot of time during the COVID years making sure that it was accurate. And also, by the way, he passed away in 2019. I went to his memorial service out in California. But today, just an hour ago, his ashes were interred at the Arlington Cemetery. And his family invited me to come for that, but I told him I had this obligation here at the library, and I knew that Bob would want me to be telling the story of the Blackbird instead of making a trip to his interment. So out of memory and respect for Bob, I'm here. So, very proud of Bob Gilliland. Now, the engines were Pratt & Whitney J58 engines, 34,000 pounds of thrust apiece. The engines are really interesting, jet engines. And our maintenance did a really great job keeping our engines working properly. You see the black tubes in the middle. There's actually 6 of those black tubes around the engine. And as you accelerate through Mach 2, valves start to open that will route the compressed air from compressor section number 4 around the combustion chamber and directly into the afterburner. So that gave the engine a partial ramjet effect. It wasn't a true ramjet, but it had a ramjet effect. That's the afterburner section. That's what the afterburners look like during the flight. In front of each engine is a cone or a spike, and that spike would withdraw into the inlet as much as 26 inches during the flight. As you went higher and faster, that spike would slowly withdraw, and there were bypass doors to keep the shock wave in just the right position. The inlet system was really ingenious and fascinating. The air has to be subsonic as it goes through the engine, and the way that's possible is that due to the speed of the airplane, molecules are packed together. They're slowed down and packed together before the molecules go into the engine. So the pressure on the left side of the shock wave was about 0.4 psi, and on the right-hand side of the shock wave, the pressure is about 14.7 psi. So the engine thought it was at sea level the whole time. Now another phenomenon was a phenomenon called the unstart, and that shock wave would sometimes get suddenly spit out. And when that happened, you lost sudden loss of about 80% of the thrust on that side. It was not dangerous, but with that asymmetric thrust, you get a sudden yaw, and it happened so suddenly, it actually felt like a small explosion. You'd be flying along, all of a sudden, boom, you know, and sometimes your helmet would bang on the side of the canopy. It was not dangerous, but always surprising. So then the spikes would go full forward, and we would reset the shock wave and be off and running again at normal speed at about 15 seconds. And if we had repeated unstarts, we had controls in the cockpit where we could control the position of the spike and the position of the doors, the bypass doors. Now our mission was reconnaissance, so we took pictures, keeping a watch on countries that might start hostilities. Our main camera was carried in the nose, and then we had other sensors and cameras along the sides of the airplane. When I started flying the airplane in 1983, our main camera that started, instead of being an optical camera, started using ASARs, synthetic aperture radar. So with that ASARs, we could get pictures at night and through weather, and get pictures that were almost as detailed as an optical camera. So that made the airplane more useful. Get pictures at night and through the weather. We were based at Beale Air Force Base, north of Sacramento. You see the hangars there for the SR-71, and then those wide hangars over on behind those and on the far right were for U-2. And the U-2 airplane still flies today. It's a lot cheaper to fly. They have to be careful not to fly it in a dangerous area where it can be shot down, but the U-2 is still very useful today. So from Beale Air Force Base north of Sacramento, we would be sent temporary duty to Kenina Air Base, Okinawa, Mildenhall, England, and from those three locations we flew our worldwide reconnaissance missions. At Beale, we also flew the T-38 in between Blackbird flights, because it was a lot cheaper to fly, and we could practice our instrument procedures, formation work, aerobatics. So the pictures that I have of the Blackbird were primarily taken with the T-38 flying in loose formation with the Blackbird. We always flew the Blackbird with a pressure suit because we were up really high, near 80,000 feet. Our cockpit was pressurized to equivalent of 25,000 feet, but if we were to lose cockpit pressure, you don't have enough pressure on your body, and if you're above 63,000 feet, your blood starts to boil. So, you know, it always ruins your whole day whenever your blood starts to boil. So we wore a pressure suit as a safety backup to losing cockpit pressure. Because our cockpit was at 25,000 feet equivalent, we had to breathe pure oxygen during the flight. You see those oxygen leads. And then just below the visor, you see a small valve there. So during the flight, we could keep ourselves hydrated with a Gatorade. We had a long plastic tube, and we could stick that in the valve and then hold the bottle up, keep ourselves hydrated. Here I was crewed with Kurt Osterheld, a great guy from my RSO. The backseat position was called RSO, Reconnaissance Systems Officer and Navigator. He was excellent. He was from Wisconsin. Now you see the bulges at his midsection. That's a life preserver. So if we had to bail out over water, the life preserver would automatically inflate and keep us floating. And in our survival kit, we had an inflatable life raft, one-man life raft. Since we had ASARs, we might be flying our missions any time of day or night. Here we just happened to arrive at the airplane just as the sun was coming up, so we snapped a quick picture. Now the sun is shining into the hangar, and because we're wearing pressure suit gloves, we needed these pressure suit experts to get us all hooked up with our seat belt and air hoses, oxygen, communications leads, parachute, survival kit. This is what our instruments look like in the cockpit. You know, they kept the airplane updated through the years with updated computers. I started flying with analog computers, and those were updated to digital computers. And there's constant improvements in the software, and improvements in the materials on the airplane. Other number of things being improved on the airplane, but there was never a need to update the pilot displays. Those 1960 pilot displays worked just fine. So we would start the engines there in the hangar, do our pre-flight checks right there in the hangar, taxi out. And it was always really exciting taxiing out, because you knew pretty soon this amazing machine was going to take you right up to the edge of space and 3 times faster than sound. So it was always exciting taxiing out. You knew something pretty special was about to happen. Taxi onto the runway, light the burners, always kicking the pants when those burners would light, accelerate rapidly down the runway, lift the nose 180 knots, lift off 210 knots, and climb out at 400 knots. Now it seems funny, the first thing we would level off, our first level off was only at 25,000 feet, where we would air refuel at 25,000 feet. And the reason is we always took off with only half a load of fuel, because if we had a full load of fuel, lifted off and lost an engine down low, slow, might not be able to control the airplane. So for safety, we took off half loaded of fuel, climbed to 25,000 feet, air refueled in there. If we lost an engine, we're going fast enough we could bring the airplane back and land it just safely. Airplane held 12,000 gallons of fuel. Here, this picture was taken from the boomer's pod of the tanker. Now, in front of the boomer's receptacle on the airplane, you see the round window about 8 inches in diameter. Underneath that window is a little telescope. The airplane for navigation had an inertia navigation system like most all commercial and military planes have nowadays. But those inertia navigation systems drift over time, and you have to keep updating them through the flight. The inertia navigation system is updated with radio signals from the ground. We couldn't depend on the Russians to give us good radio signals for updating our navigation. So we had a little telescope that would slew around and find stars. And so the backseater had to tell the computer what day of the year you're flying. And there's a real accurate clock in the airplane that told where the Earth was in its rotation. So the computer knew where to look for a star, and then it would search for the star until it found it, lock on and measure that angle. And then it would just continuously update that INS system through the navigation. I thought that was pretty slick for early 1960s. Yeah. Get our fuel and then back away from the tanker, light the burners, and it took about 20 minutes to climb to our initial cruise altitude, typically around 75,000 feet, and then we would do a cruise climb during the flight, gradually getting higher as we burned fuel down to be more efficient. We were more efficient with our fuel to be a little higher as we got lighter. So this is what it looked like about 80,000 feet. You can see just a slight curvature on the Earth, but more noticeable than the curvature was how dark it was overhead, because we were above 97% of the air molecules. So it was really dark overhead, and then bright band of blue on the horizon, since most of the air was below us. So you had the feeling of being at the edge of space, even though we're only 15 or 16 miles high. You're a long way from any orbit. You're going to be about 100 miles from orbit, but you had the feeling of being at the edge of space, and it was always a real smooth flight because we were above the wind. There was never any wind up where we were flying. We had a lot of missions along the northern border of Russia, keeping a watch on the submarine ports along the northern border of the Soviet Union, being loaded with missiles with nuclear bombs targeted for destinations right here in the United States. So the SR was just one of many ways to keep up with where the Soviet submarines were. And the reason there were a lot of submarine bases along the northern border was because the shortest distance from the Soviet Union to the United States is over the northern pole region. That's the shortest distance, and so that's why those bases are along the northern border, along the Arctic Circle. Now it was interesting to fly along the Arctic Circle, especially in the wintertime. The day-night line runs almost east and west along the Arctic Circle in late December. And our mission might take us back and forth across that daylight line several times, and we weren't concerned with where daylight was because we're using ASARs for our pictures. But one time, my mission just happened to cross the day-night line 6 times in less than an hour. And so in less than an hour's time, I'd seen 3 sunsets and 3 sunrises. So it was unusual. Here you see the planet Venus there. And when it's time to come down, we would start leaving a contrail as we descended through about 40,000 feet. And here this picture was taken with a T-38 joining up on us as we're approaching the base. We were flying right by Mount Lassen, north of Sacramento, back to our base in Sacramento. Mount Lassen is a volcano and exploded, a violent explosion back in 1915. But it's a beautiful sight, beautiful mountain now. So we put the landing gear down for landing at Beale Air Force Base. Final approach at 175 knots. Flare, then touchdown at about 155 knots. Deploy that big orange drag chute would get us slowed down in a big hurry. And then we taxi into the hangar. And it was always a great feeling of satisfaction after every Blackbird mission, because not only had we just flown the world's fastest, highest flying airplane, but we had done something important for our country, for the cause of freedom. So it was really a great feeling of satisfaction after every Blackbird mission. Then after 2 years of flying missions, I continued to fly missions, but I was also asked to be one of the instructors. So we built 2 trainer airplanes with the back cockpit built up higher so the instructor in the back could see forward and demonstrate landing and air refueling, answer questions for the new pilot. But in the 1970s, they crashed one of the trainers, so from mid-70s until it retired, we just had 1 trainer, and that 1 trainer that's remained trained all the pilots from mid-70s on, and that plane is now on display at the Air Museum in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was always a real honor to train somebody new in the Blackbird. You can see the back seat instructor position there. But when I say new pilots to the Blackbird already had about 10 years of high performance jet experience. And then before his first flight, already had about 100 hours of academics and simulator time for flying the Blackbird. Here I just instructed Jim Halsell on his first SR-71 Mach 3 flight. The other guys come out and congratulate him. Wing commander pins on his Mach 3 pin. Real proud of Jim. He later was picked as an astronaut, and he had 5 space shuttle launches, and it was so good to invite me to all of his launches. I saw all of his launches, and it's such an impressive sight seeing that launch in person and knowing you have a friend sitting into that booster. Proud of Jim. These are the patches that were on our green flight suits, and you see that word Habu there. That Habu name was given to us by the Okinawans. The Okinawans thought that our long, sleek, black airplane with its flattened fuselage reminded them of their highly poisonous Habu snake. And so they started calling us the Habu, the airplane Habu. And so that name caught on. It's known almost as well being Habu as it is the Blackbird. So after our first overseas reconnaissance mission, we got to wear the Habu patch on our uniform. Then after a total of 4.5 years flying out of Beale Air Force Base, one of the 2 test pilot positions came open down at Palmdale. I'd always wanted to be one of the test pilots and applied for it, and I had a good record in the airplane, and they liked my engineering grades, and so they hired me as one of the 2 SR-71 test pilots down at Palmdale. Really enjoyed that job. And in the middle is Ben Rich, who took over Kelly Johnson's job with the Skunk Works after Kelly retired. Palmdale is close to Edwards Air Force Base, which you see under the airplane here. Edwards Air Force Base is built on the edge of Rogers Dry Lake, a 10-mile-long, hard surface dry lake that you can land an airplane on, and that's why Edwards has been the premier test center for airplanes since the 1940s. You fly in an airplane, you lose an engine, you glide right down and land on Rogers Dry Lake. In the early 80s, they put black lines on Rogers Dry Lake for the space shuttle to have something to line up on and land. So sometimes we'd go out and watch the space shuttle land, and then a few days later watch it taxi out on the back of that big 747 on its way back to Cape Kennedy. Always such a majestic sight. Then sadly in late 1989, Congress voted to retire the Blackbird to save money because of a lot of improvements and advances in spy satellites and unmanned reconnaissance airplanes. They felt like they could get by without the Blackbird, so they voted to retire it. Boy, we sure were disappointed because we love flying the airplane. So Lockheed asked me to, out of being out of Palmdale, which is close to Burbank where the Skunk Works was, asked me to make a flyby for the Lockheed employees down there who had spent their careers on Blackbirds and other airplanes. And so it was a huge honor to fly the airplane along the flight line for the Lockheed down there at Burbank. It's the only time the airplane has been seen in flight in the Burbank area. Now, I never got to meet my hero, Kelly Johnson, who designed the plane, because when I got to flying the airplane in 1983, he had had some light strokes and he wasn't taking visitors except from his best friend. So I never got to meet him, but I got to fly in front of him. They brought him out in his wheelchair that day, and so I got to fly by him 3 times. And Ben Rich was with him in the wheelchair, and he said Kelly Johnson had tears in his eyes as we flew by. And rocked our wings as a goodbye signal, and we headed out. So it was such a huge honor that day. Our commander asked families to bring their, asked employees to bring their families out to watch one of the last flights of the Blackbird. So that was an honor that day too. And here I'm showing you, signing a picture of Shane Gansell. He is Kelly Johnson's step-grandson, and Shane now is probably around 45 and is working for the Skunk Works. The Skunk Works has been moved from Burbank to Palmdale now. So all the museums wanted an airplane for display, including the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian wanted an airplane, and not only did it want an airplane, but they wanted it to set an official coast-to-coast airplane speed record. So they wrote a letter, Dr. Harwick wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Air Force and told about how excited he was about getting the airplane for display, and said how neat it would be if the airplane would set an official coast-to-coast speed record. That would call the public's attention to what a great airplane has been for our country for 25 years. So down at the last sentence, it says, I hope you will find it appropriate to order that the last flight attempt a coast-to-coast speed record. So I was ordered to set a speed record. So I was excited, of course, for that opportunity. My commander, Don Emmons, called me and he said, Ed, I want you and JTV to your RSO to take the airplane to the Smithsonian. I want you to work with the NAA, the National Aeronautic Association, work with them. They monitor and establish official airplane speed records, and I want you to work with them and set an official coast-to-coast airplane speed record. He said, ordinarily you're not allowed to fly faster than Mach 3.2, but I'm giving you permission to fly Mach 3.3 for that last flight to the Smithsonian. So JTV, RSO, and I were extremely fortunate for that opportunity, excited about it. And this is our plan. We flew it as planned. We would take off from Palmdale, fly up towards San Francisco, join with 2 KC-135 tankers, air refuel going south, and then we would be about 200 miles off the coast. Well, let me tell you also, fuel is going to be really tight to fly all the way across the country and then turn around and land at Dulles Airport for the Smithsonian. So we did not have enough fuel to cross the coastlines at top speed. So we planned it and flew it as planned, accelerating from the tanker's 200-mile running start and cross the west coast at Mach 2.5, and then they would start the time, and then we would be at top speed 8 minutes later at Mach 3.3. And then just prior to Washington, D.C., it would come out of Afterburner and start descending and slowing down, crossing the east coast at about Mach 2.5, turning around and then landing at Dulles. Now, Lockheed also asked if we would do 3 city-to-city records. So you would think a city-to-city record ought to be from takeoff to landing, but the NAA doesn't do it that way. You pass the cities at speed, and they get the time as you pass the city. So we were able to do 3 city-to-city records at Lockheed's request, along with the coast-to-coast airplane speed record. Okay, so on March the 6th of 1990, JT and I briefed up our last SR-71 mission in the wee hours of the morning. While we're briefing, maintenance is getting our airplane ready to fly. We put on our pressure suits one last time, making sure my pressure suit's going to hold pressure properly, make sure my speaker and microphone is going to work just fine. Then we taxied out at 4:15 in the morning, Pacific time, California time, which is 7:15 in Washington, where we're going to take the airplane. Taxied out. We took off at 4:30 Pacific time, flew up to San Francisco, joined with those 2 KC-135 tankers, refueling going south over the Pacific. Now it was pitch dark out that night, and there was no moon, no horizon, but we had refueled at night many times, so that was refueling at night was not a problem. Then we lit the afterburners. It was still pitch dark out there where we were, so this picture was not made that night, but it gives you an idea of what our afterburners would have looked like to the tanker pilots, who we so appreciated as we accelerated away from them toward the west coast. That's what it did look like as we crossed the west coast. In the early morning, we're going fast as a speeding bullet toward the sun, so the sun's starting to come up rapidly. It's still twilight, but it was just bright enough that I could see the white ocean breakers all along the coastline. Such a beautiful sight, and still dark enough that I could see all the millions of lights of Los Angeles. And then to my left, 300 miles away, I could see San Francisco, and then to my right, San Diego, and then the darkness of Mexico beyond that. Beautiful sight. Then going supersonic toward the sun, so the sun's up just a few minutes later. Here we're going right by Las Vegas, and you can see Lake Mead down there below. And then at the top, 1990, that's the entire city of Las Vegas at the top.
Wow.
A few minutes later, we're going right by the Grand Canyon that you see there, the Grand Canyon. A few minutes later, we're going right by the majestic mountains of southwest Colorado, Purple Mountain Majesties, as described in that wonderful song, America the Beautiful. When I should have told you, when Don Emmons told me to set that record, he said, when you land, you can tell the media that you flew from sea to shining sea in just over an hour. And that got me thinking about that wonderful song, America the Beautiful. So that's why I was thinking of that song when I was flying by the Purple Mountain Majesties. And then a few minutes later, we're going just south of Pikes Peak, 60 miles south of Pikes Peak, and I could see Pikes Peak out there. And it was the top of Pikes Peak where Catherine Bates was inspired to write that wonderful song, America the Beautiful, back in the late 1800s. Then just a few minutes later, we're going right over that fruited plain that she sang about in her song. Hundreds of miles of prime American farmland. It was a special flight, so I was having special thoughts and thinking, boy, look at all those thousands of hardworking farmers down there starting their day, getting ready to raise food that feeds most of our country, and even enough food to export overseas. I thought about our brave pioneers that I read about as a boy, taking months to cross country, that JT and I were crossing in just a matter of minutes, just 150 years before our flight, still taking months by wagon train and Pony Express. Thought about what a great country we have made great by the hard work and sacrifices and prayers of our forefathers. The eastern part of our country was undercast, so I didn't see many features. in the eastern part. But JT and I just made sure we enjoyed one last view of God's earth from 80,000 feet, slight curvature of the earth, the darkness overhead, the bright band of blue on the horizon. Thinking about how very, very fortunate we were to serve alongside hundreds of other dedicated men and women who had served with the Blackbird through its 25 years of service. And most of all, just made sure we enjoyed our last few minutes of flying this marvelous airplane that we love to fly. Came out of Afterburner, approaching DC, and then we crossed the East Coast. The airplane had just flown sea to shining sea faster than any airplane ever has before or since. So that record, 67 minutes and 54 seconds, still stands after 36 years. I'm anxious for that to be broken up. And also blessed really to have this opportunity. But I like to see progress. I'm hoping this record will be broken pretty soon. I'd like to see something faster. I keep waiting for him to call me and ask me to fly. NAA gave the newspaper an initial estimate of something over 68 minutes. So it was something over 68 minutes that was in the news that night and in newspapers. But then they went back and reviewed the tapes and decided 67 minutes, 54 seconds was the proper time. And that's the time that's in the record book. Well, we had just enough fuel to land at Dulles with a bare minimum required fuel reserve, but they wanted us to make a few passes for the crowd, two passes for the crowd really. So they had a tanker meet me and give me just a little bit more fuel so we could make two passes for the crowd at Dulles. Took just a little fuel, descended through the undercast. We wanted one pass at 800 feet, and I made that pass perpendicular to the runways so I'd be closer to the crowd near the tower. Then I circled around and they wanted to pass it 200 feet. So circled around, and then at 200 feet, being the crowd, I lit the afterburner so they could feel the power of those two big J58 engines. You see the beauty of those orange plumes behind that beautiful black airplane. And that's the same picture that was on the front page of the Washington Post the very next morning, March the 7th, 1990. And they had a nice article about how the Blackbird had served our country for 25 years. We landed, deployed the big orange drag chute one last time, taxied into the Dulles terminal that you see there. Somebody had hung a big American flag on the Dulles Tower. I was really excited and happy to see that flag there. Was not expecting it, but really appreciated that patriotic gesture. Now the wind has the flag inverted in this picture. Then our maintenance crews were there from Palmdale to chock our wheels and prepare the airplane for handover to the Smithsonian. JT and I hopped out and shook hands one last time from flying it. Now I'll never forget how we felt. You know, we were both happy and excited that we had just set some speed records and flown the world's fastest plane, but mostly we're feeling sad, but really sad about it because that's going to be our last flight in the Blackbird ever, and the last time that beautiful black airplane would ever fly. So we're mostly feeling sad about it. Ben Rich was there from Skunk Works to give us a thumbs up signal. There was a planeside ceremony as the Air Force handed the airplane over to the Smithsonian, several short speeches. That's Dr. Harwick who wrote that letter requesting that coast-to-coast speed record, telling you how glad he is to have the airplane for display. That's Ben Rich with the Skunk Works, talking about how the airplane had served our country so well for 25 years. They gave JT and me coast-to-coast speed record certificates, which we really appreciated, but we both know that it's the airplane speed record. We're just lucky to be the crew that day. Any of the crews had the skill to fly the flight. So anyway, we felt really fortunate for that opportunity. It's one of my favorite pictures. I turned around and then Mom and Dad were on the tarmac to give me a hug. I knew they were going to be in the crowd, but I didn't expect them on the tarmac. But they talked their way out there. And, I'm just so proud of Mom and Dad. They're my heroes. Dad served 3 years of World War II right out of high school in the Navy CB. And then he went to school on the GI Bill, got an engineering degree, and served our country as a TVA engineer for 35 years. Mom was a nurse and got her nursing certificate while Dad was away in the Navy. And they wrote letters back and forth and really fell in love during those war years. They had dated a little bit in high school. So Mother became a nurse, and then during her middle age years, she went back to school and got her teaching certificate and became a school librarian and taught at Underwood Schools and also Central. I'm the oldest of 5 that they raised. Then when my cousins lost their mom and dad in a car wreck in 1969, Mom and Dad took in 5 of their kids. The oldest one was in college, so he wasn't home most of the time. But I'm just so proud of Mom and Dad for taking in my cousins and loved them as their own. So these are 2 real heroes right here. And JT and I answered questions from the media talking about a blackbird, how it was like to fly. And then that night on TVs all across the country were short news clips about the airplane speed record that day.
Of the Pentagon budget cutting, but the SR-71 reconnaissance plane is not going quietly. It was a sonic boom you heard in the San Fernando Valley this morning, as John Marshall reports.
This story begins here. Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects, better known as the Skunk Works. In the early 60s, Kelly Johnson and a team of engineers set out to build a plane that would fly faster than a speeding bullet. And that it has, for 25 years. The story ended early this morning at Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale. Lieutenant Colonels Raymond Yeilding and J.B. Vita put on their spacesuits for one last historic flight. Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, coast to coast, Los Angeles to Washington. The SR-71, the Blackbird, can cruise at 2,200 miles an hour, 16 miles above the Earth, because its titanium skin can withstand operating temperatures of more than 800 degrees. Flying faster and higher than anything else, the spy plane has never been shot down. After takeoff, the Blackbird was refueled by an Air Force tanker plane, then pointed east, as the 2 J-58 engines were cranked up to maximum cruising thrust. The sonic boom rocked the Los Angeles area just after 6 a.m. The SR-71 did everything it was supposed to do, arriving at Washington's Dulles International Airport 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 32 seconds later, shattering the old record. Average speed, 2,112 miles an hour.
But like every good thing, it must come to an end. So let me say and conclude by saying goodbye to this magnificent, sophisticated flying machine. Bye-bye, Blackbird.
John Marshall, Channel 4 News.
I've got just a few more slides to show you. And then 2 days later, JT and I had to make our way back to our base in California. We had airline tickets for the big 767, United Airlines 767. It was a non-stop flight from Dulles back to California. Tickets right in the middle between those two aisles, and it was a good flight and all, and the service was nice. But gosh, it took 5 hours. This picture represents the retirement of the Blackbird, and these are our records. 67 minutes 54 seconds for the coast to coast. LA to DC, 64 minutes 20 seconds. You can see these on the internet if you're interested. Kansas City to DC, 25 minutes 59 seconds. St. Louis to Cincinnati, 8 minutes 32 seconds. St. Louis to Cincinnati was the only record where we were able to beat our cruise speed over the entire record distance. And so our average speed was higher than any of the other average speeds, 2,190 miles an hour. So the airplane is on display at the Dulles Smithsonian Museum called the Eberhazy Center. And it's displayed right in the center of the museum. It's really an interesting museum, and then behind the airplane you can see the Space Shuttle Discovery back there in the back. Really a fascinating museum. JT's pressure suit is on display near the airplane. My pressure suit is on display at the Air and Space Museum downtown near the Capitol. It's on the second floor in a room called Speed. You can spend hours, interesting hours in the museum there. I want to tell you too, Skip Butler's Cobra is on display near the Blackbird in the museum. Also, Skip was awarded the Silver Star for valiant flying in the Cobra during the Vietnam War. And we're just lucky to have Skip with us in the far corner back there. Would you raise your hand, Skip? So glad you could count today, Skip. So I'll show you quickly some of the airplanes I flew after that. My next Air Force assignment was in this C-20 Gulfstream, and one of the most satisfying missions was flying Ambassador Oakley over to Africa, where he won the release of, he was able to negotiate with those chieftains and get the release of Michael Durant, Black Hawk Down Michael Durant, who was captured for a while over there, in bad shape over there. So it was satisfying. That's Oakley. So it was satisfying having a small part in saving Durant's life. He wound up having a 20-year career with the Army and lives in Huntsville. And then, while I was also flying that C-20, my backseater RSO JT Vita got cancer and passed away just 2.5 years after our record flight. Boy, we sure miss him. He was a great friend, and he had more time in the Blackbird than any other crew member in history. He had 1,392 hours in the Blackbird. I had 785 hours. Then over a year after he passed away, my dad passed away, and so I decided to retire after 23 years in the Air Force and fly for the Northwest Airlines over in Memphis so I could get home and help Mom a lot more often with things. Enjoyed flying with the other Northwest pilots, and then eventually I had enough seniority I could thumb a ride up to Minneapolis and fly the DC-10, and then eventually I got to fly the big 747-400. It too was an engineering marvel, carried 403 passengers and all their bags. 4 great big huge engines, 57,000 pounds of thrust apiece. Had a more modern cockpit than I'd ever flown before. Really enjoyed flying that 747. Also, then Delta acquired our Northwest and painted airplanes Delta colors. Here I'm standing by the wheels of the 747. That big 747 had 18 wheels, so I guess you could say I retired on 18-wheeler. I enjoyed my years with the airline and prior to that, my military years too. Just feel so fortunate. And then just a note about what the future might hold. They're building a transport, 1.7 transport in North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina, so that is a possibility. Lockheed built this airplane, non-flyable airplane, for the movie Top Gun Maverick, they actually built the thing for the movie, and it's on display at the Air Museum in Palm Springs, California. But it's just exciting to think what the future might hold. The biggest challenges in going faster is metallurgy and the temperature on the metals. I want to share this real quick with you, because this was such an important event in my life. In 2013, I was asked to be with Mayor Haddock ribbon cutting for our new F4 display over in Florence, in Veterans Park. I gave a talk that day, But then a lot of my a lot of my family friends came from out of state to be there as an excuse for a little mini reunion. And some of us decided to line up in the exact same order that we had lined up back in 1979. So that's what we looked like then. I don't know if you can tell any difference in This is another real reason I wanted to share that day with you, because I got a picture with my good friend Carl Poole. Carl lived in, I'm pretty sure it was Sheffield, either Sheffield or Muscle Shoals, but is anybody here that knew Carl Poole? Nobody? Well, he lived about 2 more years after this picture, and he lived to be almost 99. Anyway, he was present at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, December 7th, 1941. So I asked Carl a lot of questions about that day, and he was good to answer them and tell me about his service during World War II. And at one point I said, Carl, we sure are our freedom. Or our freedom to guys like you. And he just paused and said something so important, simple but so important to remember. He just said, well, it takes us all. And I think it's so important to remember that. You know, every military job, and I think of it beyond the military also, every job that does something important for or something useful for our citizens helps make our country a great, great place to live. It takes us all. And I want to close with this 5-minute tribute to Kelly Johnson. He's the main hero in this whole story. This 5-minute video was made about 25 years ago by one of the Lockheed cameramen. It was an unofficial tribute, so it was just this cameraman's idea, and he put it together, and it's been real popular. So share this 5-minute tribute to Kelly Johnson.